Welcome back. It's time to make the mortises for those tenons we cut in the last video. Now, there's lots of ways to make mortises. We could drill out most of the waste on a drill press and then square up the edges with a chisel. We could just chisel out the mortise completely. Or we could use a jig and use a router to clear out most of the waste. But I'm going to use my hollow chisel mortising machine, and I'm going to show you how I set this up to make sure I get perfect mortises every time. But before we do that, we need to mark out the locations for those mortises so we get them aligned perfectly. So let's get going. I have laid out the individual pieces of the two doors according to the orientation I had originally planned, using the labels that I wrote on the boards with chalk. And the way I've laid these out is this is the left door, this is the right door. I am standing by what will be the tops of the doors, and the bottoms of the doors are closest to you. Now, keen observers, and we have a lot on this channel, will notice that the two doors look different. Well, the reason for that is that on this door, I positioned the rail in more of a classic configuration, and that means that this top panel is a little taller than the bottom panel, basically following the golden ratio to set those distances. On this door, I've put the rail dead center in the middle where the two panels would be exactly the same size. And now I just have to decide which one I like the best. Now, I thought about throwing it open for a vote, but there's really only one vote in my house that counts, so I guess I'm going to have to figure this out myself. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure up from the bottom to this rail on both doors. I'm going to get those two measurements, then I'm going to go upstairs where the linen cubby is located, and I'm going to hold the tape measure up and visualize the rails in each of these two locations to see which one's going to look the best. After that, we'll be ready to mark out the mortise locations and get to work. Well, that didn't take long. No question about it, hands down. The classic look is going to be much better. So let's get going marking these out. All right, our tenon is a stepped tenon or a haunched tenon, and this shorter piece of the tenon is going to fit in the groove that we cut in the stile earlier. So the only place where we have to cut a deeper mortise is for this section right here. And that section starts at 1 inch up from the bottom of the stile and ends at 2 3/8 inches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the stile up on its edge, and I'm going to make a mark at 1 inch, and I'm going to make another mark at 2 3/8 inch. And I'll come back with my combination square and run this all the way across, but I'm only going to make the mark on this side of the stile, and I'll show you why I'm doing that in just a minute. Okay, now to achieve the look that I'm looking for, I determined where I wanted to put my mid rail, and of course this is not a haunched tenon, this is a pretty much full size tenon here. So we've got a fairly big mortise to cut, and where I want that to start is at 24 3/4 and end at 26 7/8. So exactly the same thing. I'm going to turn this up on edge. I'm going to make a mark at 24 3/4 and a mark at 26 7/8. and do that on all of my stiles, and that'll be the positioning for my mid rail. Now the top rail is going to be just like the rail on the bottom, except turned around and reversed. So that's the mark out procedure. Let me get that done and we'll go set up the hollow chisel mortiser. To complete and perfect your marks, just flush up the ends of the stiles and clamp them together, and then you can go right across and mark your mortise locations. Just remember that we are only marking the face side of each stile. With our mortises marked out and ready to go on the stiles for our doors, I want to turn my attention now to my mortising machine, sometimes called a hollow chisel mortiser. And the reason I want to spend a little time on this is because this little machine is generally within financial reach of a lot of home and hobbyist woodworkers. However, if you don't follow some key setup tips, you can be disappointed with the results. If you follow the little tips and tricks I'm about to give you, you'll get excellent mortise making results. The first thing to be aware of is how this works. And basically what this is a square shaped hollow chisel. Hence the name of the machine. And inside that chisel is a drill bit. And it's a very specific type of drill bit. It pulls chips and ejects them rather rapidly. You'll see the look of that drill bit here in just a minute. And the key to getting a good mortise cut is the drill bit needs to enter the wood just a little bit prior to the chisel. What you want is the drill bit to break up the wood and then allow the chisel to cut down all four sides. The drill bit will eject the chips as it goes along, and it'll cut your mortise walls nice and square. But to do that, and this is tip number one, make sure that the chisel part of this is sharp. And I don't mean just sharp, I mean really sharp. In fact, if you were to touch this right now and not draw blood, it's not sharp enough. All kidding aside, when you get this really sharp, you should be wearing gloves to install this in your machine. The second thing is squareness. And that's that this chisel, which is a square, needs to be absolutely perfectly square with the fence. If it's not, you'll be making a series of slightly off square cuts the length of your mortise, and everything will look ragged and chewed up on the edges of your mortise. The third thing is lubrication. I've not found anything better than this product, which is called OptiCut SS. And I will tell you right off, this is very, very difficult to find. I can't even tell you right now where you can get it, but I know it's still available because I recently bought a bottle. I just can't remember where I got it. You'll have to do a little web searching for this, but it's called OptiCut SS, and it's made by Empire Manufacturing. Little goes a long, long ways, so this bottle will last you for a good long time, but definitely get this. And what you want to do is you want to spritz your bit here a little bit every once in a while as you're cutting your mortises. This will cool and lubricate this, and this product will not interfere with finishes or the glue, so great thing to get. And my last tip on this is to make sure that you run some practice cuts and use the same exact wood that you're using for your project, because it will make a difference on how fast and how hard you pull this handle. Now, as you can see, unlike a drill press, this is a big long handle with lots of leverage. You can put an awful lot of pressure on as you're going down to cut the mortise. And that's good because that'll make the chisel slice through. Bad if your chisel's not sharp because you'll crush the fibers rather than cut them. All right, having said all that, let me spend a couple of minutes showing you the bit set itself and how I sharpen it. The machine maker has thoughtfully but pointlessly provided this little honing cone on the machine, ostensibly to sharpen your chisels. Forget that this even exists. Just pretend it's not even there, because this will not get your chisels sharp enough. All right, this is our hollow chisel mortising setup, the bit setup. And first thing I want to show you is this opening here. You can actually see the drill bit inside the chisel. And you'll notice that the other three sides are not open, they're closed. That's so that the chips come out one direction. Now, I like to have the chips ejecting towards me. In other words, have this opening facing me when I'm at the operator's position at the mortising machine. That way I can observe the chip ejection rate and adjust the speed and the pressure that I'm putting on the handle as I make each downward stroke. But that's personal preference, I suppose. Let's pull the drill bit out of here. You notice this is inside the chisel. And here's our drill bit. The first thing you'll notice is this exaggerated flute pattern here. And that's so that the chips eject rather rapidly. If you've not seen a flute pattern on a bit like this before, it's probably because you don't have a pocket hole drilling setup. Pocket hole drill bits have a similar flute arrangement so that it ejects the chips rapidly as you're drilling pocket holes. Same principle here. You'll also notice that this is a brad point bit, meaning there is a very sharp tip dead center in the middle of the drill bit that allows the bit to self-center and not wander as it enters the workpiece. So let's go to the business end of this. Let me show you first the bevels. This is the inside bevels, and I'll try to get an angle here where you can see it, but you'll notice that if you were to fill in these four sides, the inside would basically look like a cone, a conical shape. And you've got these very sharp corners here, and then these curves. And this all is an important geometry to allow this to enter the wood and slice easily. Sharpening this is really honing. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to get a smooth honing stone, and you want to make just a couple of passes on all four sides nice and flat, using the flat of the chisel just to deburr and smooth the outside edges. Then you want a nice cone honing set like this, and what you'll notice is this one, the little bit more coarse grit, has never been used. Forget it, I don't use it. Only this fine one is the only one you need to use. And what I like to do is I like to put just a little bit of 3-in-1 oil on here as a lubricant, and then you can simply insert this real carefully into the bit. Now I like to hold the bit and turn the cone. Some people like to hold the cone and turn the bit. It doesn't make any difference, whatever way works best for you. And simply rotate this slowly, evenly, and keep it just as straight as possible. Don't let it wiggle or move around like I'm doing here on this video. But if I was doing this upstairs in my sharpening setup, I would have this much more stationary and I'd be doing a much better job. So after you get done honing, then set your cone aside, go back to your super smooth honing stone and make one more pass on each of the four sides to remove any burrs, and you are critically sharp and ready to go. Now, should the geometry ever change, or should you get a nick and you're tempted to use the medium grit cone, forget about it, throw this away and buy a new one. They're not too expensive, and the geometry is so important to a successful mortise that it's just not worth fooling with. Once you're sure that your chisel is sharp and your setup, bit and chisel are installed correctly in the machine and perfectly square to the fence, the rest of the setup is pretty straightforward. On this particular machine, there's a rack and pinion system here for adjusting the fence in and out to get your cut where you want it on your workpiece. Once that's set, there's two knobs here, two levers that lock the fence down into place. Then you want to put your workpiece in and adjust these two rollers so they're up pretty tight to the workpiece, but still able to move it. And what you want to do really is make sure you're holding the workpiece flush to the fence. This piece right here is adjustable up and down, and that's what helps you hold the workpiece down when you raise the handle and you pull the chisel out of the work. Unfortunately, it can't really be touching because that makes it hard to move it through. So maybe the thickness of a sheet of paper is about what you want for clearance between there. And then the last thing is the depth stop. And on this machine, it's a real simple setup. There's a crank handle thingy that tightens it up. You loosen that and this metal bar slides up and down. You simply set it where you want the depth to stop on your plunge and you're good to go. So I've kind of chewed this board up here making tests, but let's make a little test cut here and I'll show you how the chips eject from this system. And let's spray a little of our OptiCut on there. Make sure we get a nice smooth cut. And you can see the chips ejecting quite nicely actually, and that's about the speed you want to go. Just about like that, nice smooth cut down to the depth stop. Raise this up and move it over now to elongate your cut. Now I like to get as much of a bite as I can in each pass. First of all, it speeds up the process. Secondly, the additional wood that you take is giving support to the chisel and the drill bit. And the only thing you don't want to do is go so far that you leave a membrane of wood between your two cuts, because then you just have to come back and remove that. That's just about right like that. So let's do another one. And as you can see, that's really fast compared to cutting them any other way. And this is the one we just cut. Nice smooth sides all the way around, smooth walls to the mortise. In fact, the only way you can even tell that this was done on a hollow chisel mortiser is if you get a bright light and shine it down into the hole. You can actually see where the drill bit is slightly proud of the chisel. It won't make any difference, it'll never show, and it's past the depth that you need for the mortise. So I think we're set up, we're good to go. Let's start cutting them. I've got my first style ready to go. I've set up a work support out here. I actually have the feet sitting on pieces of sandpaper on the floor so it doesn't slide. This was a little fiddly to get this just right, so I was level across the work table here. You'll notice that on the style, I've got the face facing me. And you'll remember that when we marked this, we marked only one side of the board on this side of the groove. That is also to help remind me of the orientation of the board for all the mortise cuts, because I want to put the boards in all in exactly the same orientation so that even if there's a little microscopic difference front to back, they'll all at least be the same. So we're ready to cut. Okay, there's our first mortise. Now we're going to move and cut the middle one. Okay, on each of my stiles now, I've cut the mortise in the end and I've cut the middle mortise. Now I've moved my work support over to this side, to the left-hand side, and I'm going to work on the last of the mortises down here on the other end. Now, on the other mortises that I cut, I moved my workpiece left to right. On these, I'm going to move my workpieces right to left. And there's a little bit of a reason for that, pretty good reason actually, and that's because as you're going through this and making your overlapping cuts, if you think about it, one side of your chisel is hitting a blank. Every time you've got a little bit of overlap, it's just going into blank air. So the wear is not even all the way around. So if you switch up left to right and right to left, you'll get more even wear on your chisels. I know, that sounds pretty arcane, doesn't it? Looking good. We've got all the mortises cut. Now it's time to start fitting the tenons into the mortises. And that's going to be pretty easy. In the next video, I'm going to show you 3 different ways to smooth those saw blade ridges out of the tenons and fit perfectly into the mortises that we just made. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but I did want to spend a little bit of time explaining the hollow chisel mortiser to you so that if you wind up purchasing one of these, you can get the most out of it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.